All right, welcome everybody to this podcast of O365A. Today we're going to interview a special guest on the very important topic of M365 Security. So with us today we have Antonio Maio from Protiviti, and we're going to discuss M365 Security and what he sees. So welcome, Antonio. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Protiviti?
Awesome. Thanks, Curtis. Thanks, guys. So my name is Antonio Maio. I'm a director with Protiviti. I lead our technology consulting practice across Canada. And I've been working in the security space for a very long time, going back to the 90s. Part of my university degree focused on cryptography. Then I got into working on PKI and public key infrastructure cryptography solutions. And then through a number of different roles and engagements, I've always had some aspect of my work focused on the security space. And a lot of our work at where I am now, we do a lot of work in the M365 platform. And my specialty, especially in the MVP community, is security in M365. So things like security, governance, identity management, these are the areas that I like to play. Microsoft MVP, like all of you guys, proud MVP. I've been part of the MVP program for 10 years. So happy to be here with you guys.
And hence the Canadian jersey. So,
yes, exactly.
Very good. All right, over to you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Antonio, for being here. So to get started, obviously, the last couple of years of the pandemic has changed a significant amount, from the M365 landscape. A lot of additional investments in security have gone into play. And maybe you can just tell us about, what ways has the pandemic changed how customers are looking and consuming security-related products and services in M365?
So that's a great question. When the pandemic hit, some companies, especially like folks like us who work in tech and we can kind of work anywhere, working remote was, at least I found it easy. My team found it easy. We were kind of doing it already. But a lot of companies weren't prepared for that, right? So having things in place for solid connections into the office from home, having work laptops, having secured laptops, having video conferencing systems like Teams and so on in place, that wasn't there for everybody. So we saw a lot of companies suddenly jump on, the internet in a more meaningful way with video meeting solutions, chat solutions. A couple of our customers, their employees didn't have laptops, so they were working on personal machines. So when everybody kind of immediately went remote after COVID hit, you kind of had this scramble, right? And then organizations kind of started to really adopt solutions like Microsoft Teams and remote work in a meaningful way because they had to. So you suddenly saw a lot of organizations, okay, we got to do this for real. And it really unlocked a lot of IT budgets to really bring in solutions like this. Now, a lot of them rushed to it. So security might have been, not as good as it should have been for some folks. So we've seen that start to get cleaned up now. So you see organizations investing in certainly solid solutions like Microsoft Teams for remote work, but then also increasing their network bandwidth, which had suffered for a long time for some organizations, and then implementing security solutions like Microsoft Intune, so that devices that people are using out in the field become managed, right? Managed corporate devices. Whether it's a mobile device like a phone or a laptop or a tablet or something like that, turning it into a managed device through a solution like Intune allows the organization to ensure that policies are enforced on it, right? So good password hygiene, segregating applications that are used for work versus personal applications, segregating work data from personal data, so that if, let's say, a device gets stolen, they're able to remotely wipe that and only wipe the work-related data and leave your personal stuff alone. So you've seen a lot more investments there. You've also seen investments in things like Microsoft Defender, which Defender is now kind of a family of products, right? So you kind of need to be specific on the type of Defender. In particular, I mean Defender for endpoint. So on the endpoints like laptops, servers or endpoints as well, primarily for laptops, having both, more advanced antivirus functionality, which we've had for a long time, and Defender has been antivirus for a long time, but also having EDR functionality, so endpoint detection and response. So not only scanning data for viruses, but also looking for threats, other kinds of threats from bad actors out there, and being able to defend against those. So I'd say those are, a couple of areas that organizations have started to invest in, because I think hybrid work is here to stay for a lot of organizations. So they're making sure they're prepared for it.
Yeah, no, I definitely saw a lot of what you were saying at the beginning, where everybody started working remotely and they started using these services, and the security was sort of, I wouldn't say at the end, but they put the most minimal governance around M365 just to ensure that they did have some sort of security in place. And then once they did the rollout and stuff like that, now a lot of the organizations that you met have come back and are sort of doing a lot more, security and governance on just M365 in general, and implementing like MCAS to, be able to secure the endpoints and stuff like that as well, right? And get that additional logging and stuff. So I thought that was definitely interesting, how that has sort of changed, right?
Even things as simple as requiring people to use MFA, we kind of take that for granted, right? Using multi-factor authentication to log in. Like, we all here have cell phones and probably have multiple cell phones, so it's easy for us to do MFA. But for a lot of folks, especially like in public sector and government, they didn't necessarily have a work-issued phone, and they might not have been allowed to use their personal phone, right? Like some of the government agencies we work with, like they have 12,000 mobile phones they've issued to employees that they manage. And it's like, okay, how do you... Like, that's a lot of phones to manage. And when you've got people that don't have one and they need to work remote, and you want them to be able to even just authenticate securely, how do you enable them to do that? So even little things like that were challenging for some organizations.
Right on.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue. So what are the, if you're looking at it as an organization that's going down into the kind of the Microsoft 365 security path, what are the typical projects that your kind of customers are engaging in to kind of start this journey?
So that's actually a great question, because one of the things that I've seen organizations struggle with is where to start, because the security landscape in Microsoft is vast, right? There's a lot of solutions out there, and it overlaps with a lot of the compliance solutions. So some things that you sometimes think traditionally were security are actually in compliance, or vice versa. So where to start is a good question. We have seen organizations very much start with trying to adopt what we call a zero trust model of security, where you no longer trust your network bandwidth, your network boundaries. You no longer trust your network boundaries. You assume that your data is going to be out on the internet somewhere, and that your applications are accessible from the internet. And you base people's access on their authentication, on their identity. And you verify their authentication, their identity at multiple stages whenever they're trying to access an application, whenever they're trying to access a piece of data. That verifications of someone's identity and their permissions to access that data is just validated every step of the way. So that's kind of a real high-level summary of zero trust. There's a lot that goes into it, but this model of zero trust is what we've seen a lot of companies start to adopt. And when you translate that to Microsoft 365, that starts with a few things. So first of all, getting your identities into Azure AD. So, most organizations have their identities in AD on-prem, or did, and, synchronizing that to Azure AD is one. And then controlling access to Microsoft 365 and other cloud services through conditional access policies. Right, so CA, or conditional access, is kind of a key place to start, where once you authenticate, a number of conditions get evaluated. And those conditions can be based on a bunch of different factors you can build into your policy. So things like your location, right, where you're logging in from, the application you're trying to access. There could be, conditions based on the session that you're trying to establish. What else? The groups that you belong to. There's a number of factors that you can build into your conditional access policies, and configuring those to kind of meet your organizational security needs tends to be one of the first steps. You can do things like require MFA from someone when they're trying to access this particular application and they're not on the corporate network and they're accessing from a non-managed device. You can do things like that. There's a whole bunch of functionality that goes into conditional access policies, and managing them is a little bit of an art. So that's one place I like to start.
Yeah, I was going to say around the conditional access that I've seen it not done well. People thinking it's like firewall rules where it's like, hey, the first rule that it hits, that's the only rule, and not knowing that they might be leaving themselves open. So I agree, conditional access is definitely a critical step in that's their trust journey.
Yeah, one thing I like to recommend to people when we do, like sometimes we're brought in to assess a company's conditional access policies and how they manage them, is to encourage companies to make sure that their conditional access policies remain pristine, right? They're clean, they're well named, they have a naming standard. You don't have test policies in there. You don't have policies that you put in and you deprecate it and are still sitting there and you're not sure what they do. And everyone that has access to them knows exactly what the outcome is going to be. So keeping it like firewall rules, manage them very much like firewall rules, right? It's not a place where you mess around. It's to go change a conditional access policy, you got to go through some corporate approval, a standard change control process, and then a change gets put into place at a scheduled time. So just one of the things that we like to recommend on those.
Awesome. Lots of stuff there, and for sure. I want to ask you about kind of the future of M365 security and what areas you're most excited about. But maybe as a precursor to that, a lot of my customers, you talked about governance, and this is like a huge topic for a lot of my customers, and probably everyone's on this call. They just don't know where to start. I'm finding, and they almost want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to enlighten them and say, like, it's not about me telling you what to do. It's about covering off on all the possible levers and controls and the different things you can do. You as an organization have to go and figure these things out to what best suits you. So I'm not sure if that resonates with you. Do you see governance as a service making a big play, like where they just entrust maybe an application? I know there's apps right now that can help you do governance, but I don't know if that's something you see or excited about, but I'll turn it over to you and maybe you have a few thoughts on that.
It's a good question. I haven't seen a lot of governance as a service solutions or offerings out there. I think that's a really hard thing to offer as a service because governance is a big word and it means a lot of things to different people. I've seen companies position third-party solutions as a governance solution for like Teams and SharePoint and so on. Usually it's like a team or site request form and an approval process that those things go through, and some reports that it creates that you can create yourself in PowerShell, right? So usually those governance solutions are kind of a cobbling of those things. And yes, they can be nice and they can be perhaps an easy button for some organizations, but it's very much going to depend, I find, on the nature of the organization. Like if I look at a public sector organization, so government, let's say federal government or provincial government, from a governance standpoint, they usually want to identify who is responsible for the different features and capabilities and requirements, and what are the standard operating procedures around them. So that's often where they start. And as part of that, they learn how the features work and who's going to be responsible for what lever. So often we start with like a RACI matrix of, okay, all the different security tools and capabilities and compliance tools and capabilities and who's responsible and who's accountable and who's consultant, who's informed for all of those, right? And in talking through that, you figure out how the different groups either work together or don't work together well. And then we also work on standard operating procedures. And again, this is public sector, right? This is federal and provincial government. To comment on that for a second, what I found is, you guys might have found this in your work as well. In the past, these organizations would have had an Exchange team and a Skype team and what else? A desktop team and other siloed teams like this. And I find as they move to M365 and as you figure out, roles and responsibilities and you figure out standard operating procedures, those teams tend to need to meld, or at least have much better communication amongst each other than they used to, because there's just so much cross-pollination of features across the platform. In private sector, I find it's a little bit different, where they tend to be more concerned about protecting data. They tend to be more concerned about things like data loss prevention solutions, with CASB solutions like Microsoft Cloud App Security, or what's now called Defender for Cloud Apps, right? So protecting the data and protecting the ingress and egress points of the data. So data coming into the organization and data going out of the organization. They're very concerned about attack vectors like email, right? Which is still the most popular attack vector for Office 365, right? Phishing emails, still the most popular way of attacking and gaining access to someone's tenant. So they tend to be more concerned about those. To give some indications of where to start, we talked about conditional access policies earlier. That's definitely one place to start, right? Get your identities cleaned up, get people using multi-factor authentication, get conditional access policies set up and understood well. That's one place to start. The next place after that I find is Defender for O365, which is going to protect primarily email, because again, the primary attack vector is email. So those are the places that I like to start. There's no easy button. And I don't find there are, managed security providers that will come in and manage the security of your tenant for you. And some of those are good. Some of the organizations that do that are very good. Our organization does that in the US. But if I was running any of these organizations, I would want my own team to know how to manage these features. I don't love the idea of outsourcing our security to somebody else. It just feels something that should be kept in our walls, kind of thing, at least the knowledge.
Sure.
So long-winded answer to your question, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's good. So what do you think, like what do you think the next frontier is in security? Like, what are you most excited about?
Oh, next frontier of security. So one thing I'm excited about is just all the integrations between the security workloads that we see happening. Right, like one thing we didn't talk about was Microsoft Information Protection, which is a family of products, but people often think of it as sensitivity labels or classification labels that you assign to your data about how sensitive it is. We're seeing that get integrated into a lot of the security workloads, right? So you can base things like data loss prevention policies on the sensitivity that was assigned to a document or email. Cloud app security policies based on the sensitivity that was designed to that was assigned to an email or document, right? And it means that our policies that when they get enforced, can be much more specific to the type of data that we're exchanging, which is brilliant. Like, I love that idea that we can be that granular, right? That we don't have to put up big giant walls that stop people from sharing stuff externally. Instead, now I can have a sensitivity label on a team that says, okay, this team is confidential, so we're not going to allow external user access or guest access. But this other team is public or is meant for, sharing with clients, so we are going to allow that one. I don't have to use just a big switch to say no external sharing or all external sharing. I can be very granular in a very easy way. So we're seeing a lot of those kinds of features filter into the platform just to give people more options, which nice. I like. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
So in terms of the future, hoping to see more of those types of integration. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Curtis, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that this is really great stuff. I just wanted to continue on I'm really curious about the scenario where hybrid work, user has a personal device at home, either cell phone or computer. You cell phone, mobile phone. You referred to using conditional access, MFA. What are you seeing from a pure security perspective? Is it better just to say, look, whatever you're using from home should be a managed device, vis-a-vis managed by Intune all up? Or are you seeing there's enough security controls in Defender for Endpoint for Defender and the other tools that you can allow someone to have a personal device and just control it that way?
It's a great question. I prefer that. So there's two things I would say on that. So if it was my environment, I would say we're going to require people to use a managed device, managed by Intune, when they want to access, our workloads in general, and to do meaningful work and, download data to their desktop and to work on documents in the Office suite, for example, right? You're going to require a managed device, a corporate issued managed device in order to do that. But if you're going to work on a personal device, I would like to allow some access. In particular, one of the controls that we have is I can configure SharePoint sites, for example, and this works for Teams as well, where I'm storing files in Teams, where I can let people access a SharePoint site. I can let people access files in Teams. I can allow them to view and actually edit documents in the browser through the online versions of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, but they're not allowed to download those to a personal device. So what that means is when you've got a personal issued, mobile or a laptop, I can do all the work that I want because it's an Intune managed device and it's corporate and they control it. But if in a pinch I have to log into another machine, I can still view my data, I can still get some work done, but I cannot download any of that data and leave it on that personal device, because that's what ends up happening, right?
Yeah.
A home computer that lots of people in the home use, including your kids, and your kids are playing video games and downloading stuff all the time. You don't want corporate data left on there that can get exposed. So I like that mix of the two.
Yeah, that's a good model. So it's limit what you can do on the personal device, but make sure you have a fully managed device for full access.
That's right. Yeah, that's my preference. Yeah.
Good stuff.
From a mobile device, like our company allows BYOD, right? And they are Intune managed devices. So I can go and buy my own mobile phone as long as it's an iPhone or, an iOS device or an Android device. And I can connect it up to our corporate network and it becomes Intune managed. So there it's not a corporate issued device, but they are managing it with Intune and they still kind of control on the mobile what apps are wrapped, so what apps are protected. And even in my Outlook, I can have my, my work email, which is fully managed by the company. I've got a personal email, and I can set up a boundary between the two so that I can't copy data from a work email over to a personal email. That too, getting that granular is awesome.
That's really good stuff. And my only other question is, you referred to some service before as Skype. I'm not sure what you're referring to there.
Sorry, old school, some government agencies, yeah.
That's right up there. That's right up there with my cell phone reference. So. All right, that was fantastic, Antonio. Maybe I'll just open it up to the guys for any other final questions.
Yeah, I have one, given that I think it's like one of the big features that's hopefully going to be coming out in Teams, which is the Teams Connect or shared channels. How do you feel about what the governance requirements are going to be for that as an organization? Because I know you mentioned that, this team, could be public and you can have guest users coming in, but that means that they're authenticating against, their Azure AD, using that token to sign into a secondary tenant and then accessing the tenant. But now the team is shared across organizations. So now I have a view in and edit docs and stuff like that. Is there going to be, a lot more governance thought that has to go into that functionality?
That is a great question, because I don't think people have fully thought through the governance implications of that. Because you're right, there's a whole bunch of issues that could happen, right? It's okay, I share this channel with another tenant, and I forget about it and I move on to some other project, and that person, that other tenant, still potentially has access to that channel that still has data on it. The implications of that I don't think are well understood or known yet. So I think there's going to need to be some management of shared channels over time, governance and oversight of that, and the ability to expire that sharing. I don't know to be very honest, I don't know what security controls are coming with it, but I'm hoping there's some ability to expire that sharing, to have good visibility and reporting capabilities on it. But I think that's going to be important. The idea of sharing data that way, I think there does need to be an integration of sensitivity labels with that somehow, right? Like you can apply sensitivity labels to documents and so on, and you can apply them to a team or a site, but applying it to a team or a site is at the team level. It's not at the channel level, and it doesn't affect the content within yet. So I think there does need to be more work there around, if I share this externally, how do I prevent someone from putting confidential data on it that then goes to the channel and gets shared externally?
Well, and you have to think about labels that span tenants, right? Like if you have another tenant that has different classifications of data, and their users putting data in that channel.
Yeah. And labels don't span tenants today, right? Like the label is effectively a GUID in your tenant with a display name. So if I send you a document that's labeled, you're not going to be able to see it as labeled the same way that I do, depending on your tenant. There's no sharing of labels across tenants right now. Like you'll see it labeled, but I don't know if you see it in every experience. Yeah, I think there could be a lot of challenges with that in secure environments. I don't know. Are you going to have the ability to turn off shared channels? I assume so, but I'm not sure on that one.
You will. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I think there's going to have to be a lot of thinking through the governance scenarios of that before people turn it on. At least in the government agencies that we work in and other agencies that have sensitive data, they're going to need to think through that before they turn that feature on. Yeah.
All right, Dino, you had a question about apps?
You're on mute there, buddy.
Sorry, that would help if I unmuted. Antonio, I was going to ask you your opinion on the Microsoft Teams App Store, and this is a topic that comes up a lot, and we're trying to obviously, build adoption, balance adoption with users. So wide open, they can install whatever app, and then you're trying to secure that with, let's make sure these apps, do what they say they're supposed to do. And the whole point of the store, there's almost 1,400 apps and published in the Microsoft Teams store. I'd like to see the ability for users just to be able to control their fate with respect to apps. But I see a lot of customers just turning it all off, and then it becomes an impossible task to get an app in the store. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that are, and maybe some strategies for managing that.
My opinion tends to be counter to yours. We usually recommend that people turn it off.
Okay.
Not the whole store altogether. Usually it's publish the Microsoft apps, or at the very least, if they don't want all Microsoft apps, a subset of Microsoft apps, and then any third-party apps turn off until you have a chance to evaluate them and publish them. Mm-hmm. I'm coming at it from the opposite end of security and compliance and an IT or security team wanting to manage the applications that people use, because they have a hard enough time with people, stopping people from using Dropbox and Box and 16,000 other cloud services out there that'll store your data. So that's a hard enough challenge as it is, let alone letting people install their own apps and teams. So our common approach is, when you're first rolling out Teams, deploy the Microsoft apps, disable the third-party apps for now, and then have a process to evaluate the apps and enable them when people want them.
That's just it.
Yeah.
The problem is there's a lack of a process in all these organizations, and they hide behind that, and apps never get installed. And this is what I have a big challenge with, and I feel like it's stifling the absolute power of the platform of Teams, because these vendors have gone through producing a certified application. It's gone through checks and balances. I mean, we don't push out phones and prevent, you have your mobile device, which allows you to have access corporate apps, but I don't know of any corporation preventing you from installing, a third-party app on an Android or iPhone today. They just allow you to do it. And anyway, it's a bit of a
you're right,
near and dear to me, but yeah, I can see both sides of it for sure. I think that what orgs need to do a better job of is get a process created, because users will say, hey, I would like to consent for this application, and it goes into this black hole in Azure, like somebody might have set up.
Yeah.
The fact that it goes to this IT admin and nobody checks that email, and it becomes a really frustrating thing for you.
Yeah. So I do find that it's a journey for companies to get into this, right? Like a lot of them are just trying to get their users to understand what to do in Teams, right? Like as simple as a lot of our customers are still struggling with, I need to get my users to just understand, don't use OneDrive as a collaboration space with your entire team. Yes, you can do light sharing in it, but don't use it as, okay, my whole team collaborates in my OneDrive. because that's not what it was built for. Like a lot of our customers still at the basics of those types of things, let alone, oh, I want to throw in a whole whack of new apps into Teams. So
Right.
my hope is that they will get there, but I think they're still trying to get there. They're still, a lot of companies are still at early stages, especially in Canada.
Yeah, fair enough, for sure. Thank you.
That's kind of what I've seen. Yeah, that's a tough one, because you're right. There's a lot of good innovation that's been put into those apps, and you'd love to see people make use of them, but there's only so much change people can take at a time.
Yep.
I feel like we could dedicate a whole podcast to talking about apps.
Yeah.
So Antonio, this has been fantastic, because I find from an M365 security perspective, the hardest part is just getting a handle on what's possible in the whole umbrella and ecosystem of M365 security, as you pointed out. So I think this has been a great gateway, a great introduction to the subject.
Awesome.
So thanks very much for coming on, and we'll cap it at that, and we'll see you on the next episode.
This is great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.